Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee, and of course joining me is Milly.
Hi.
And the special guest who'll be interviewing today is Stephanie DeBruzo. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, thank you for letting me come chat with you today.
Well, it's absolutely amazing, and we're really looking forward to getting into the timeline of your career and focusing on some of the other projects as well. But in order to kind of get a glimpse of that, I want to go back towards the beginning, and to that end, I understand that your career as a Muppet performer began in 1993, and in terms of voiceover, that was in 1998. But before that point, what kind of got you to that
You've done
stage?
your homework. Sorry. Continue, please. I apologize. I'm just impressed.
No, I was just wondering, we've got those dates, but before that point, what was your journey like, to get there? Did kind of one come before the other, or what made you really want to go down the career path that you did?
Well, I mean, from the time I was a wee little peanut, I've always been a bit of a ham, natural performer, whether anybody wanted me to or not. I did a lot. I was very lucky. I did a lot of high school theater. I had a great theater program in high school. But I didn't become a theater major in college for various reasons that I won't get into now. Basically, I did a program that was very method heavy, and I couldn't wrap my little 16-year-old head around method at the time. I just wasn't there, right, in my journey. And so I was regrouping, and I became a radio, TV, film production major, but I still loved performing, and I found myself performing in a lot of my friends' student films, which was great because all the theater majors were too busy. And I was making my own things, and I just couldn't stop performing. I didn't want to stop performing. It was something that really brought me joy. And puppetry was something that appealed to me based on my revisiting the Muppets when I was in college. I'd always been a fan, but I hadn't watched in a while. And looking at the Muppets through a performer's eyes, suddenly seeing the potential in what I could do without it mattering what I looked like. And of course, I knew voiceover acting was a viable thing as well, but the difference between voice acting and being a Muppet-style performer in particular was that as a puppeteer, you're in total control of the character. Really, when you're a voice actor, you're only doing half a performance. The animator is doing the other half of the performing. And I'm kind of surprised over time that animators and performers have not received dual credit for a performance. But that's a whole other tangent. But I loved being able to do things with a puppet character, in real time with people that you couldn't do with an animated character, and that I could, act the silences with a look, with a deadpan reaction. So that's how I pursued that end. But of course, I've always been full of character voices, and once I sort of got a little bit of a toehold in the puppetry world, I didn't want to try to start out doing everything at once. I didn't want to spread myself too thin because I didn't know anything. So I wanted to sort of get a toehold into the puppetry world, which I was lucky enough to be able to do. And then in 1998 was also I needed a voice agent, because you kind of can't do much in the voiceover world, at least in the US. I don't know how it is where you are, but in the States, you definitely need a voiceover agent. And so I had to find one, and I did, and that's how I started doing some voiceover stuff. I haven't had as strong a voice career as I would like, but I'm lucky that I've gotten to do some really fun things.
Well, it certainly has been, and like you say, a very interesting career. And we can't wait to, delve into a little bit further the certain projects that you worked on and everything like that. But I guess still sticking at those early stages, I know, like you said, performing really is something that came quite naturally. But is there any shows or any, performers in particular that you inspired you heading down that career path?
Oh, that I did? Or that I saw other people do?
Oh, that you, like anything you watched growing up or anything like
my
that,
goodness.
that kind of, really decided that that's something that interested you.
I can't think of any one thing that made me say I want to be an actor or I want to be a performer, because I didn't always think that I wanted to do that. You know, I knew I loved to do it, but it wasn't anything that was going to be encouraged for me as a career. I didn't make that decision until college, really. I thought that I would go into something like advertising or business, because that's what relatively intelligent people did. And as a woman, I was born in 1971. This was the birth of the feminist movement. Even though there were more options for women, you have to remember movies like 9 to 5 came out in the early 80s. Working Girl came out in the 80s. These are still movies that showed women in the business world as still somehow being less than. So I assumed that maybe I would wind up making coffee for someone. I don't know. I really didn't know. I didn't think that a career in performance was viable, because all that pop culture had ever taught me was actors are starving and failures and it's a hard life. And of course it is. It is a hard life. I'm very lucky. But it's not something that you hear a lot of people who go into dance saying, I saw a production of the Nutcracker and I said that. No, I was a pop culture kid. I was a TV kid. I didn't watch a ton of TV because I wasn't allowed to. We only had one TV. But everything I saw, I sang a lot. I sang to Sesame Street records when I was little on my swing set. Every chance I had to perform, I did. Although that wasn't something that I always got the smallest part when I was in school, except if there was a narrator character. I could read very early. I could read at the age of 3. So when I was in first grade, I was one of the better readers. So if we were reading a play in class, I was always the narrator. And I didn't want to be the narrator. I wanted to play a part, but I knew how to read. So, yeah. So, or when I was in 5th grade, we did a Mother's Day show and they ran out of parts before they got to me. So it wasn't, I know, I kind of had to write my own part. It's true. I wrote my own part for the Mother's Day show. It's not something that I think I was the last person anybody expected to really make a go of a career in performance. And again, as I said, I've been very lucky with circumstance and timing. But I was inspired by everything. I watched, variety shows, like the Carol Burnett show, and I, saw people like Bernadette Peters and Madeline Kahn and Julie Andrews, and I wanted to be a combination of those 3 performers in particular. But I also think of a lot of the sitcoms I watched in the 80s, and I think about character actors, a lot of male character actors that I was inspired by, people like John Larroquette and Peter Scolari and Michael J. Fox and Michael Gross on Family Ties, and just a bunch of people doing solid comedy work on sitcoms, ensemble comedies like Cheers and Night Court and Barney Miller and oh gosh, I can't even think of, and I don't even know whether you've seen some of these shows. And again, I'm much older than you, so I'm dating myself, but and I didn't really see much theater when I was young too, and we didn't go to the movies very much. And my family didn't have a VCR until later. I know this sounds like such a terrible, oh, poor little me thing. It's not meant to be that. It's just meant that I was able to find inspiration from things that other actors with their noses in the air might find mundane or pedestrian. But I was inspired by a lot of that. Linda Lavin in the sitcom Alice, that was a huge influence as well. Just seeing what people could do performance-wise in comedy. And then, of course, the Muppets, eventually seeing that one performer could play multiple characters that were so varied in their style. You look at the number of characters Frank Oz played on the Muppet Show. I mean, he was Fozzie and Miss Piggy and Animal and Sam the Eagle and all such very, very different characters. It was one guy. And I thought, what an amazing opportunity to have a variety, just to explore that depth of what you're capable of doing. I love doing a lot of different things. And so it really, it's always appealed to me to be able to do something where I could do many, many different things. The 80s casts of Saturday Night Live, Nora Dunn and Jan Hooks and Phil Hartman and all those people doing sketch comedy. I don't know. I had a lot of influences.
There's definitely a lot that you've mentioned that I'd love to pick up on, and that's noticeable in the fact that you mentioned puppetry so good because you can work at it in real time, but also that
Yes.
you didn't always find it the most exciting thing in the world to be a narrator because you wanted to play, one of the characters. And so I wanted to ask, to what extent would that be almost wanting to perform a certain character, or the aspect of physical movements? Like, how important is physical movement in the performances that you've done in your career?
Well, I want to go back to the narration because what I couldn't appreciate at the time was the fact that a narrator is a storyteller. And since then, I've, learned more about storytelling, and I took storytelling in college. And, when you're young, you just can't appreciate those things. I appreciate it so much more now. Being a narrator, it's like playing the stage manager in Our Town. You're telling a story and breaking that fourth wall and connecting with an audience in a way that sometimes other characters can't. But you can't know that at 7 years old. You just can't. As far as physicality, I can't necessarily say that I'm the most physical performer when I don't have a puppet on my hand, but puppetry definitely is a very, very physical thing to do. Mostly because you have to, manipulate just the puppet to make it come alive, but also just having a puppet stand there and talk isn't very interesting. That was something that sort of intimidated me when I first came to Sesame Street and was watching other performers work, is that if you're in the background or you're doing something that's not focused on your character, you need to come up with some sort of physical business to be doing. When you're a honker in Hooper's store in the background, and many times where I do that, even still to this day, Stephanie, can you go be in the background and do something? You have to figure out something physical to do that's not going to take away from the foreground action. It's not going to take away from the story, but something. You have to be active. And so, yeah, it's always important to just not be a talking head, which I know is ironic considering that's what we're doing now. We're just being talking heads. But I guess it depends on the kind of work that you're doing. I'm not a physical comedian. I'm certainly no Bill Irwin. But that being said, I'm not a dancer. I'm an actor who moves a little bit. But yeah, you kind of have to be doing something. I work in a visual medium. So, and puppetry, puppetry on the radio doesn't really work so well. So yeah, I'm kind of always trying to figure out new ways of doing things with puppets movement wise. And every puppet is different too. Some puppets you can do less with because of how they're built. If it's a puppet with there's so many different kinds of puppets, but a puppet that has live hands, where like a puppet like Cookie Monster or Rolf the dog on the Muppet Show, where it takes two people and there's actual hands in there and they can move things and pick up things. Or then there's a rod puppet like Kermit or Bert, where it's just hands that don't have, that have rods on them and they can't pick up things in real time. You have limitations with some characters. So you have to figure out what works best for that particular puppet and that particular character. I babble a lot, so jump in.
No, it's just honestly fascinating to hear, your tales of how you've, the puppets you've worked with, what the industry's like, how your career's transpired. And I think, for everybody listening, it's quite interesting as well, because a lot of the people listening, do aspire to go into the industry and things like that. So I know you were mentioning, for example, with the voiceover work, a key, part of that was finding an agent and that kind of thing. What advice do you give to people that are looking to get into the industry?
Practice a lot first. Know what you're doing before you make a demo tape to send to an agent. You really have, and it depends on what kind of voiceover you want to go into. There's so many different kinds. People like to think of voiceover as just this blanket thing. doing a voice in front of a microphone. There are so many different kinds. There's obviously, everybody thinks about animation, character voices, right? Having a million voices. Having a million voices is fine and all well and good, but it's not necessarily what's going to get you a job. It may not be what people are looking for. I have not gotten most of the jobs I've auditioned for. I would say my percentage of booking is infinitesimal. Sorry, infinitesimal. I'm not pronouncing that word correctly. It's tiny. Feel like Porky Pig. Infinite tiny. But knowing what you're doing going in. So if you want to do, character voices, not just imitating other voices, but doing something original, or knowing how to bend your voice, knowing how to make one vocal quality into many different characters, not just based on how high or how low your voice is, but the cadence and the rhythms and the intensity and the youth or age or the heaviness or the gravitas, those things. Then there's also commercial voiceover, where you're doing, just for any kind of commercial. There are different shades. There's a more announcery tone. There is a more casual tone. Big trends in voiceover for commercials, at least in America, are towards that young conversational, like you're just talking to your friends about, I don't know, heart medication. Sometimes you are playing a character, but it can't sound cartoony. Then there's video game voiceover, which is a whole other. I've done only a couple of them, and that's a different kind of intensity altogether. Then there's audiobook voiceover. And that is a very disciplined thing, because you get paid by the finished hour. So you can work 8 hours, but if the book length is only 3 hours, you will get paid for the 3 hours. So people who are proficient in audiobooks, again, this is only in the States. I don't know how it works where you are, but some people, you have to be able to do it on the first or second take. And there are a lot of people I know who don't work that way. It depends on the situation. And even within animation, there are so many different kinds of animation. Preschool animation is very different from Cartoon Swim type animation, very different from feature animation. A DreamWorks film is going to be different than a Pixar film, which is going to be different from a Blue Sky film. So there are so many different subsets, It's like puppetry or dance, really. There are different styles of dance. Tap, jazz, ballet, modern. There are different styles of puppetry, hand and rod, marionette, shadow, tabletop. There are different styles of voiceover as well. So, again, I'm really good with tangents and really bad with short answers. Know what you want to focus on before you make a demo reel. And really, you're not going to be able to find an agent without some sort of air check, some sort of demo, and keeping that brief, but showing your range. And a good voiceover agent will be able to hear a small sampling and be able to get a sense of your overall tone and where you can go from there. Back before the pandemic, there were more auditions that happened in an agent's office. So an agent assistant would actually do the audition, and because they would direct you, they could get a sense of what your range is. But even still, anything that I submit from home goes through my agents. They hear everything that I do. So again, good agents have good ears. That's a really long answer. But
It's a helpful answer, a very helpful answer.
But I mean, look, I was lucky that I had met someone whose wife was an agent, a voiceover agent. That's who I started with. And then someone saw me do something, a different agency. I've been with CESD since 2004, bless them. Someone saw me in Avenue Q and signed me from there. So there's so many different ways to go about doing it. And sometimes there's a lot of luck involved, and sometimes it is about who you meet and who you know. I have helped a couple of people, though, people I've worked with in theater, they'll say, can you help me? People I know. This is not a open invitation for people I don't know to send me reels, because I don't have that kind of power. But a couple of people that I know personally, who at least I've been able to say, well, maybe this person, maybe this person. But again, it's a tricky time, because with the pandemic, a lot of people who would never have thought of going into voiceover went into voiceover, because it was one of the few things that people could do remotely. So the odds are much longer now to get a gig. People who thought voiceover would be beneath them, they all have equipment now. They all have their home studios, and a lot of celebrities too. So it's a tricky time, and you just have to, if you really want to do it, be able to do more than just one thing. I think now I could not make a living just doing voiceover. I certainly have never made a living doing just voiceover. Doing other forms of performance, it's had to all be many things.
I mean, there definitely is some amazing advice on. I like how, you mentioned all the different aspects of voiceover and all the puppeteering as well. And given that you've been in voiceover for about 25 years now, and in, puppetry for even more so, what are some of the ways that you've seen those industries evolve over the years? And, I mean, do you feel like the future of it is looking quite bright at the moment?
Well, puppetry and animation's futures are very different. Is there one or the other that you'd like me to focus on?
I suppose, puppetry to start off with.
Well, I'm so happy to be able to say that puppetry is having a bit of a renaissance right now. Live action puppetry is, there was a very dark time not too long ago. And my hypothesis is that Flash animation changed a lot. There was a lot of live action puppetry happening in the 1990s. And when Flash animation came along, because before that, animation was all cell animation, CG was way too expensive to do for series. So Flash animation and CG animation becoming cheaper, really, there's an upfront cost if you're going to do a preschool puppet show, right? Because you have to build all of these puppets in advance. And building a good puppet, is very expensive. You don't just buy one off the rack. It involves a lot of human hours, and everything is custom, and that is a huge upfront cost. Animation is just as expensive, but it's spread out over time. And so there are people who could be a little short-sighted and don't realize, well, the cost of that puppet will be amortized over a number of series. So it's very difficult to get a lot of puppet shows produced, I would say, in the early part of this century. But in the last couple of years, now all of a sudden, you are seeing Sesame Street was one of the few union live-action puppet shows in production for a consistent period of time. But now it's really wonderful. You've got the reboot of Fraggle Rock, and I was working on an Apple TV Plus show called Helpsters, which was really wonderful. I now work on a PBS show here called Don Quixote, which is also really wonderful. Spiffy Pictures produces that, the same people who produced Scooby Doo Adventures of Mystery Map. Great people to work with in Chicago. The Muppets Mayhem is a big recent release. Just the fact that there's been a little bit of a resurgence with the Muppets. And there are so many other shows that I can't even think of right now, but you are having more live action puppetry happening than before, which is really nice, because you do see how unique it is, that interaction with people in real time, the improvisation that can happen, the characters. You know that Big Bird is tangible. You could hug Big Bird. You can't say that about Bugs Bunny. As much as I wanted to meet Bugs Bunny as a kid, I knew that costume character was not the real thing. So yeah, puppetry is having a bit of a renaissance right now, and I just hope that lasts. Animation, it's an interesting time for animation, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with some of the SAG-AFTRA negotiations moving forward. Our contract is up for negotiation. There are a lot of issues surrounding artificial intelligence. I think animation is an area where AI could become exploited and compromised and abused. I hope that it doesn't. But of course, we all hope that it doesn't, but you never know. It is a business where money often comes before creativity and pure creative intent. So I can see the appeal of, while we don't need actors, we can just get robots to voice these characters. And because the thing is that the technology is getting shockingly good, but it's only shockingly good if you consider what acting is. Acting is not just reading. Acting is not just a vocal quality. There's so much more to it. As I mentioned before, there's breath and gravity and intensity and heart, and machines can't. There will always be something a little off. Animation, CG animation, you do see a little bit of that sometimes coming into play with the visuals. You'll see cycles of animation, right, that they'll plug in, and especially with sorry, I keep hitting this mic, cycles of background characters. And you start noticing patterns after a while. I have a feeling that will eventually happen with voiceover if AI is being used. They'll try to, create an algorithm that takes a breath every once in a while and makes it sound natural, but it's going to become predictable. And the one thing that humans are not is predictable. And yeah, they can randomize it all they want to, but after a while, it's just going to feel stale. Now, granted, there are some people who don't care. Some people just don't hear it. But I don't know, there's a sixth sense that people have. Most people can tell if an actor is phoning it in or if they're not into it. You can certainly hear a smile on a microphone, And I don't know if AI will get to that point. But even if it does get to that point, I just would hate to think that we would be so quick to abandon humanity. So these are issues that are being hammered out. Yeah, I hope that, I can say, I hope that humanity isn't abandoned in favor of greed. But then I look at the world in which we live right now, and it's not looking too positive. But I have to hold out some shred of hope. Because all of the good things we've ever had in performance, especially in areas like animation, like puppetry, these truly imaginative places that you can go, you can do anything in these worlds. It's not robotic. It can't become robotic. It can't become an algorithm. It can't become something predictable. It's the same thing. A lot of people think, oh, well, AI, we can use AI to determine if something's going to be a hit or not. Nobody can tell you what's going to be a hit or what's not, because people are not predictable. We are humans. For better or for worse, we are flawed human beings. We are great and we are terrible. And that's what performers try to do, is reflect the best and the worst that humanity has to offer. You can't get that with ones and zeros. We're trying to hammer that out in negotiation, and hopefully the better angels will come out victorious. So we'll see.
Yeah, fingers crossed. There's like that element where I think there's been some instances where they've tried to make realistic, like robots, and there's almost that uncanny valley that you can see with your eye.
Yep.
I'd like to think as well that the human ear it'll almost be an audible uncanny valley that if they try and make everything all AI, it might actually potentially be quite disturbing for consumers as well, which obviously wouldn't be good for the bottom lines for the on their part as well. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how it all plays out. But you mentioned the Scooby Doo mystery map movie before,
Yeah.
which is definitely one that we refer back to quite a lot, which of course you played the
Do you
puppeteering for
know?
Velma and also the voice for Velma. So I'm curious to know, like, before that point, how familiar were you with the Scooby Doo franchise or maybe some of the other old Hanna-Barbera shows?
Oh, well, I mean, I grew up watching Hanna-Barbera stuff after school, Flintstones, Jetsons, Scooby, Wacky Races, and gosh, Huckleberry Hound, and just all of them. I can't even think of them. When we were working on it, the Puppeteers, we had this Hanna-Barbera. We were just looking on the Hanna-Barbera sites all the time, just saying, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that." We were all just going back to our childhoods. I mean, we were all Generation X. That was such a huge part. Hanna-Barbera was just the baseline. Josie and the Pussycats, and just all of those shows. Were such a huge part growing up. Now, I wasn't as familiar with A Pup Named ScoobyDoo because that was on when I was in high school and college. And so I wasn't really watching a lot of TV at home back then. I was just too busy. And so when this project came up and they said, well, the designs are going to be based on a pup named ScoobyDoo, I actually had to dial up some YouTube videos because it is a very different show. Like, it's extraordinarily different in every way. So the fact that it sort of became a blend of the two worlds, because I was very familiar with the classic Scooby-Doo. I think I even watched a little bit of the Scrappy-Doo era. Not my favorite, but that's a controversial subject for many Scooby-Doo fans. But I think it just depends on when you're born and what you grew up with. There are people who love Scrappy-Doo. It's just whatever. So for us, it became a fun way to explore. In puppetry, we do things with puppetry that are specifically puppet based. We were sort of blending some animation tropes in with the puppetry. I remember looking at the way Velma on Pup Velma walked, and she just sort of glided, and it had the little sound effect of the tick, 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 tick. And I asked, are we going to have the library of Hanna-Barbera sound effects? Because I also wanted to know, the Velma puppet that I have had a blink mechanism, and I wanted to know if there was going to be a sound effect whenever she blinked. And they said yes. And I said, can we have Velma just glide across and walk and you just hear that tick, 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 tick? They said, of course. And with the blinking, some people who do puppet characters with a blink mechanism, not all puppet characters have them. They like to do random blinks. I wanted the blinks to be musical. I wanted them to emphasize, because you wanted it to happen at the end of a sentence. So if you're saying something and then you go blink, and you hear that blink, you want it to make sense. You don't want to have a random blink interrupt a sentence. So those are things that you don't typically think about when you're just doing our kind of, Muppet style puppetry. You're not thinking about those kinds of sound effects. So it added to the musicality of what we were doing. We got a little broader, we did the thing when Shaggy's hair lifted off of his head. I remember I puppeteered the hair. And those kinds of things were really fun to explore. But yeah. So we knew about all those things going in, and that's how we were able to really sort of use those tropes in a new way with puppetry.
It's so interesting to hear about this project in detail, because I think it really ties together a lot of what you were saying about how Muppeteering really is a lot more physical than people would think. And
sure.
There's certainly, like you say, a huge step from voice acting to Muppeteering as well. Just so many considerations and things to think about. So I guess from the start of that project, do you remember how you became involved with if it was an an audition process for Puppeteering, if there were separate processes for the voice as well, and that kind of thing.
Well, I knew the Spiffy Pictures gang for a long time. Spiffy Pictures is made up of David and Adam Rudman. David has been a longtime Sesame Street performer. He plays Cookie Monster now and Baby Bear, a bunch of other characters as well. He's produced various shows. Spiffies produced various shows for PBS, including Nature Cat, now Don Quixote. Jack's Big Music Show was on Nickelodeon in the early aughts. So I've known them for years, and I've worked with them, and they asked me. They said, "We're doing this Scooby thing," and in the short sentence between the time they asked me, I just thought, oh, please let me be Velma. Please let me be Velma. Please let me be Velma. And then they said Velma, and I just, no questions. Yes, I'm there. It was originally meant to be, we thought it was going to be a series. We were hoping it was going to be a series. And then it sort of turned into this direct to video movie. But initially, we were all the puppeteers were doing the voices, and I really wish you could have heard Eric Jacobson's Shaggy. It was spot on. Casey Kasem's. I wish you could have heard Matt Vogel's Fred. I wish you could have heard Alice's Daphne. I wish you could have heard David Scooby. The voice acting was so good from the puppeteers. We cared so much. And when I did Velma, I was marrying Pup Velma and Classic Velma. I wasn't imitating one or the other. I was sort of meshing them together. And I think, and Peter Lin's doing all these other characters as well. He was so funny. I think the only reason why I got to, so all these characters were looped in post-production by the original Scooby people. The reason why I got asked, I'm pretty sure it has to do with the fact that Mindy Cohen had just parted ways with Warner's, and they had not cast Kate Micucci yet. I think that they were happy with what I did, but I also think that they had not recast Velma yet, and that I was good enough. They also wanted Peter Linz to voice his characters, but he was busy. They were shooting, oh my gosh, Muppets Most Wanted in England, and they were very, he just couldn't get away for the looping, so they brought in another voice actor to do that. So I am the lone survivor, and I had to loop to my own performance too. I had to re-record everything I did. Even though they were keeping my voice, I re-recorded everything in a different session. Thankfully, they were happy with the performance, so it was relatively easy to just copy what I did, just parrot what I did back. I would have loved the opportunity to have auditioned for Velma, because I think that if they'd asked me to audition for Velma, it would have been different. You know, it would have been that classic Velma. That said, Kate Micucci is a good friend of mine. I love Kate. I think she does an amazing job. So this was all sort of meant to be. I'm happy to be any part of the canon. But I do wish in a parallel universe that you could have heard what my puppeteer pals did with the characters. Like Alice Deneen's Daphne was just, it was great. And this is not to diminish the originals. I mean, you know, I'm not going to say that anybody's better than Frank Welker. Nobody's better than Frank Welker. It's just because this was such a different look. I think a different sound, it would have been great. And I think it would have been accepted by the Scooby fans. I mean, if they could accept my Velma. Now, granted, I'm not assuming that my Velma was accepted by everybody. I hope by you talking to me, it means that at least you've accepted that Velma. We never really thought about being part of the Scooby canon when we were doing it. We knew that we wanted to honor it. We knew that we wanted to be, but we never thought about, oh, I'm glad we didn't think about the gravity of it. Because if we thought about the gravity of it, we probably couldn't have done our jobs at all. But I really wish you could have heard these other vocal performances, because they were really good.
It is a shame that they weren't included on like the bonus features at any point or anything like that. I wish they could have like an alternate take.
I think it gets tricky. I mean, and again, this is not to diminish, Matthew Lillard was, we did ComicCon and Matthew was with us and he was so kind. And, I'm a fan of Grey DeLisle Griffin and I'm obviously a fan of Frank Welker and just everybody who's worked on these classic characters. It's not to diminish what they do at all. It's just, I think there's probably some, when you have long-time franchise characters, everybody gets a little concerned.
Yeah,
And
but I think it's true what you said, different mediums, different styles sometimes require different voices. Like obviously Frank Welker is an absolute legend, but growing up watching the live action versions, I think Neil Fanning, his grittier voice worked well in that medium as well.
Yeah.
So definitely, some flavors work well on different dishes, and I think that's 100% how to look at that.
But, look, who am I to say? I was just a work for hire, and I was just lucky that, there by the grace of the gods, fates, and fairies, that I even got to retain a vocal performance on it. But I don't want anybody to think, I don't ever want anyone to think that the puppeteers weren't up to the task of doing these characters, because they absolutely were. And again, I am convinced Peter, it was because no one else had done those characters. Those were all original characters, Gnarly Beard and all of the ancillary characters that he played. Again, I'm sure with me, it strictly had to do with them not having a Velma at their disposal. And sometimes that's just the way it is. Sometimes you just get lucky.
I mean, it's definitely interesting because I think Velma is one of the characters that has changed voices quite a lot with, different perceptions. I mean, I would personally obviously, Kate McCutcheon does a really, really good job. But if you were to ever retire from that role, I think, obviously you'd be really good for that. I mean, I think Velma's very, very good, and the voice that you put into that is amazing. And one thing I love about that is you actively said that it wasn't a case of trying to imitate what came in a Pup Named ScoobyDoo or classic Velma for that project, and it was about marrying the two together. And so is that often what your methodology is for voicing iconic characters, or does it change depending on which one it is?
I don't know that I've ever voiced another iconic character before. That's interesting. I always try to do something a little different with every character that I do. With the exception of, I play on Sesame Street, I play Cookie Monster's mom and Grover's mom sometimes, once in a while. And I've definitely made both of them offshoots because the puppets themselves, they take the Cookie Monster puppet and they put the wig and the dress on Cookie Monster. Same with Grover. Elmo's mom is a unique character that does not look like Elmo. I play her too, but she was originated by somebody else. So I have to pick up what this other voice, Fran Brill, who also played Prairie Dawn. I also play Prairie Dawn now. I kind of have to imitate what she did, but I'm not an exact voice match. So I kind of have to make it my own in some ways while staying true to what she did. I suppose that's the closest thing I can think of just to what you're talking about. But with Cookie's mom and Grover's mom, yes, I did make a choice to sort of make it so the apple didn't fall far from the tree. But it's still not exactly the same. I'm a woman. I'm playing a mother character. It's not exactly the same, but I'm still doing a similar vocal quality. Every vocal choice I make with a character, a lot of it comes from what does that puppet look like? And what does the script say that puppet should do or be like? A good puppet character is a marriage between the design of the puppet, the writer's intention, and what the performer brings to it. I'm always inspired by what that puppet looks like and what's on the page. And you kind of just take it from there. And you can always tell when you put on a puppet and you're playing around with it, if you have the wrong voice for that puppet, you can tell right away. It has to, in order to make a performance seem real, it's got to seem like that puppet that doesn't breathe, that doesn't have, muscles, that doesn't have lungs. is a living, breathing thing with actual vocal cords that voice would naturally emanate from. And not just any silly voice comes out of any character. So I'm always thinking about, well, what just feels right? And when you're in front of the camera, the great thing about television puppetry is we can see our performance in real time. We're watching television monitors, so we can see what that puppet, we see exactly what the audience is seeing. So you know when it feels right when you see it. It's a very strange thing. It's this extra little sense that we all have. And yes, sometimes if there's a producer saying, oh, can you try something a little higher or a little lower? Sometimes that comes into play, but really you just lock into something. And with the Velma that I did for Scooby Doo Adventures, it just sounded like what would come out of that puppet. Sometimes it's just play until you find it, and sometimes it just comes out. I don't know how to describe it any other way.
I mean, it was really good and fit the whole vibe and aesthetic of the movie amazingly, which is what I really love. All like the different set pieces and the different scenes that it took in that
The
whole
sets
movie.
were gorgeous.
Are there any that stand out to you as being particularly memorable to work on and even just to see in person?
Specific to the Scooby project, or?
Yes, please.
Oh, well, that big staircase in that tower was amazing to see. I remember the first time we all saw that. So we didn't have a lot of space in the studio, so we had a couple of sets standing at the same time, but when we were done shooting out a set, we had to take it down and make room for another one. So the Clubhouse was fun because it seemed rather iconic, but oh, that staircase with Scooby and Shaggy and coordinating walking down it, and all the fun stuff, all the spooky stuff we got to do there, with the cage coming down on the giant parrot, and these things that you're doing in real time. It was really fun. But the lighting, I mean, was so gorgeous, and our director of photography, was all shot single camera. It was very filmic. It was just gorgeous. But yeah, that stone stairway, that was really beautiful.
Absolutely. That's just absolutely incredible. And I guess to kind of wrap up about that side of things just briefly, this may be a potentially devastating question, so I'll hold
what it is.
I'll stay close to the chest. Do you know what the fate of the puppets actually were? Like if they archived them or if they jettisoned them, God forbid?
No, they would never jettison them. No. They're probably in storage somewhere, but I don't know whose storage. I don't know whether Spiffy storage or Warner Brothers. They're somewhere. They exist. I assure you they exist. The thing about puppets, though, is sometimes the foam rubber that most puppets are built on, deteriorates over time. And it breaks down just because of the chemical elements involved. So I don't know that all of them would be in performable condition, but they exist. They're still around. No one would ever willingly destroy anything like that. But I just don't know where they are exactly.
It's reassuring to hear.
Oh, yes.
Because we have heard some things of when they were filming 2002, the live action movie just having to rip sets down because of space, and other things where we've heard stories of people just going to the bins outside Warner Brothers and storyboards being there, and so some things. But
well, I guarantee you the sets have probably, yes, the sets no longer exist. Sets are another issue altogether. Some props, I'm not sure, but yeah, no, sets are a whole other thing. But the puppets, no, they're too valuable in every way. And Spiffy in particular, these are people who have a history with the Jim Henson Company, and the Jim Henson Company, Jim Henson has infamously never got rid of anything, and in fact had hundreds and hundreds of puppets in non-performable condition that have since been donated to the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Museum of the Moving Image in Astoria, Queens, New York. So they've had to be refurbished, and restored for display purposes, but never threw anything away. The archives is overflowing with storyboards and scripts, and my husband wrote a book on Jim Henson's first television show called Sam and Friends in Washington, D.C. It began in 1955. And I mean, Jim Henson had his, accounting books and his application for the Screen Actors Union and his articles of incorporation. And so Spiffy has definitely followed in the footsteps of not getting rid of things. In fact, when we were working on the show Don Quixote with David Rudman, who's a director on it and a performer and creator as well, there was a big prop pile in one of our early episodes. It just had a bunch of random things in it, and one of them was this little hot dog, a little plastic hot dog. And David said to me, "See that hot dog? I made that when I was in the 8th grade." What? I made that when I was in the 8th grade. He just turned 60. He made that when he was in the 8th grade. You had that all this time? Yeah. I just put it away and sit with our props now, and yeah. So I guarantee you, the Redmonds would never let anything happen to those puppets.
Oh, that is so reassuring. And I guess kind of going back to something else you kind of touched upon. I know you're saying that you'd been to some of the Comic-Cons with the people that you work.
Just one.
The voice
Just
of the
one.
Scooby. Do you have kind of any favorite memories from that?
Just the fact that I was at Comic-Con. I'd never been to one before. I'd never been to one since. We were only there on the last day, which was Sunday. I can't say that Comic-Con is for me. It was very, very crowded. I can't say I did get to go to Artists Alley, and there's a wonderful artist named Katie Cook. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she did a little caricature of me with my Velma. And so I was very happy to get a little portrait from the great and mighty Katie Cook at Comic-Con. But yeah, I just remember crowds and not being able to move. And of course, I didn't have time to stand in any of the lines and get any of the cool stuff, and all the cool merchandise was already taken. So I kind of felt like I failed Comic-Con. I did see Nathan Fillion walking toward me, and all I could think to say is, "I enjoy your work, sir." And that's all I could get out. So I did see Nathan Fillion. And we did take a picture with a mystery machine.
Oh, wow.
So that was fun.
That's cool.
They had a mystery machine parked outside. But yeah, it was a bit of a blur. It was just nice to see the project in a room full of other people who enjoyed it. I think that was the highlight for me, because most of the time I don't get to hear other people's reactions to anything that I do. It just goes off on the air, and you never know if people really like it or not.
I imagine, like you say, feedback can be tough because with a lot of projects, I imagine you work on them so much earlier to them being announced, and then coming out and things like that your mind's almost switched on to the next thing. So yeah, I guess with that kind of in mind, and I appreciate that there is that kind of time delay and things, but is there anything that you're working on at the minute that you can tell us about? Or also that you say appreciate if there's things that you perhaps can't.
No, I mean, I still work on Sesame Street. We just shot our 54th season. Yeah, so we always have fun doing that. That'll air in the fall on Max, and 9 months later on PBS in the States. But that content is always available on Sesame Workshop's. A lot of content is available on Sesame Workshop's YouTube page. The show I keep mentioning, Don Quixote, is a PBS show. It's available at pbskids.org. You can see full episodes. I play 2 great characters on that. That show is an offshoot of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's co-produced with Spiffy Pictures and the Fred Rogers Company, Fred Rogers Productions, on the original Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in the neighborhood of Make-Believe. And I don't know if you grew up with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Are you familiar with that show?
See, something's telling me based on the conversations we've had that it was more something that would have aired in America. I'm not sure if it was like
didn't air where you were.
In the UK.
Gotcha. Well, anyway, it's a preschool show with puppets. Don Quixote is a young donkey, and Purple Panda is her friend. And I play a couple of characters. I play a little duck named Duck Duck, and a cow with pink hair named Harriet Elizabeth Cow, who's an inventor and an artist. And And yeah, it's a very sweet show, definitely aimed at the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, but there's a lot of great music in it. And we're shooting that now, but season 1 is available. Season 2 will air in the States in August. But again, pbskids.org, they have a bunch of episodes and clips there. Should be accessible globally. And I got to do a guest character on Muppets Mayhem, which is on Disney Plus, which was a lot of fun. I won't give anything away about it because it's a fun little surprise. I know it's been a month since it's been out, or almost a month since it's been out, but I still want it to be as much of a surprise for people as possible. And is that it? Yeah, I mean, I again, Helpsters is still on Apple TV Plus. That last season 3 came out last year, and I'm very proud of that show. That should be available globally as well. So yeah, I've been lucky to be working, and I'm always still looking for the next job. It's always fun to be employed. I love what I do too much.
That's amazing. And where's the most ideal place, or is there a most ideal place for people watching this to keep up with the work that you're going to be doing in the future?
Just StephanieDeBruzzo.com is my website, and I at least try to keep it up pretty regularly with what I've been doing, and can see some fun pictures and get a really complete look at what I've done. Again, I've been really lucky to get to work on some great things, and yeah, it's hard to talk about yourself. It really is.
I'd imagine it must be quite challenging, especially to with the questions and stuff. But that does conclude all of the questions that we did have for you today. Just thank you so much for the time you've given us and for being so giving with your answers as well, because I definitely feel that we've learned a lot, and I know that people that are watching this will definitely enjoy it.
Yeah, and I know, like you're saying, in terms of talking about yourself, I'm certainly happy to be on this side of the questions and not the other side.
Sometimes I just feel bored with myself, and as I'm talking, I feel like, well, who are you to talk so with such authoritativeness? It's just an opinion, and please, if anybody who's watching this, this is just my little tub of salt over here. I don't know everything. I've learned a lot over the years, but I'm still learning just how much I don't know, and I'm always trying to learn more about things. But
that's good. I think the second that anyone stops learning, that's when the real concern sets in. So it's always good to keep that going.
Absolutely. Thank you for understanding that. And again, I care too much about what I do sometimes, but as I say, the more you care, the more you cry. So sometimes it's a little sometimes it's a little tricky to be a performer, but again, I've been very lucky, and I appreciate people like you reaching out with such care about the projects. Really, if nobody watched these things, then why would we do it? It's nice to know when something is seen and appreciated.
Absolutely. And I guess on that theme, in terms of wrapping things up, I want to thank everyone that's watched this today and has checked out all the other things in the series. I'll leave the links that we've mentioned throughout this in the description down below, along with our link tree. So for people watching, if you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.